Most riders aspire to ride a bike covered in bling, carbon swing arms, carbon frames, top of the range kit and equipment on it that's going to make you the better rider. The reality is twofold. One, it doesn't make you a better rider, it just covers your mistakes more. And the other is you can't all afford the bike that we ultimately love to be riding.
So the reality is that most of us will find one of these in the garage. A great bike, entry level, but nothing like the carbon one that we were just looking at. It's really all about making sure that we can get the most out of the bike and the most out of us, rather than believing it's all about the bike. And so for this technique feature, we're going to be looking at how we can get more from the bike that you own, rather than dreaming of the bike that you wish you did own.
So there's a few first initial setup options that can be applied to any bike without any upgrade at all. And we're going to look at those quickly here to see how we can maximise our performance with an absolute minimum amount of investment, that investment being a few minutes of our time.
Oh, good. Okay, so the first of the upgrades we're going to look at is your suspension. And what we're looking to do here is to set three main things. The first one is setting it for your rider weight. And so you'll either have air pressure or a spring inside the fork that you can set for the weight of the rider. From there, once that's set, you're looking to set the sag, which is the amount of travel the fork goes through when you sit onto the bike. So making sure that's set. And then looking at your compression damping, the speed the fork moves through the travel when you press onto it. We don't want it to be too fast or too slow. On most forks at entry level, all you have is a lockout dial with a little bit of compression in between. And so you're looking to get that set so that you know exactly what it does, rather than jumping on the bike and finding the fork isn't working because someone's handily put it onto lockout. Making sure that you can set that compression damping ready to go. The next one to look at is your rebound damping, how fast the fork comes back up through the travel. And what we're looking at there is we usually find a dial at the bottom of the fork leg or on the top of the fork leg here that can change that, and we're looking for a plus or a minus and getting that set up. Again, having a look at your various suspension enables you to find where that works and go from there.
Obviously the amount of adjustment on your fork is going to be directly related to the amount of money you've spent on it probably. That doesn't mean we shouldn't bother to adjust what we have got. If you get in the habit of adjusting and feeling what works for you in terms of setup, when it comes to upgrading your bike up or just upgrading your fork at a later date, you're going to be more used to the feel that you're looking for and more used to and more confident in making some small adjustments, which out on the trail can make a big difference. We're looking at this mid-level when it was bought, hardtail. I spoke to the manufacturer at one point explaining about the fork. He said to me, well, essentially what you're looking at there is a $5 fork. At point of manufacture, there wasn't a lot of time or money put into that fork. Through the chain of events and sales process, obviously it's ended up on a mid-level hardtail, but don't expect it to perform miracles when we're looking at a fork at this basic. But what we can do is make sure that we input as much as possible to maximise its performance and its potential, and not just leave it as it's set from the box and never thinking about changing it.
Those small changes can make a big difference, and the next one we'll have a look at is the brake lever position. Again, out of the box, a lot of bikes come with their levers pointing down so that our arms are straight up on the bike. What we want to do is bring the levers up a little bit so we can drop the wrist into the handlebars. Rather than being over the front of the bike, and if I push, I come forward, with the brake lever up and the wrist dropped, if I push, the bike will move away. It's a very easy setting, but it's another one of those ones that's very easy to miss, and it's all about just getting those setups done nice and early before you head out onto the trail.
The other consideration with your controls is the reach for them, being able to reach the lever in terms of winding it in and out. Again, more budget brake levers aren't necessarily going to have an easy adjust, but we can make sure that our levers and shifters are placed so that we can get our finger in the right place without having to stretch too much. So we'll make a few little adjustments there and just see how that affects our position on the bike more generally. It's amazing how such a small change in lever position can have such an overriding effect on your core position on the bike. The next thing to consider on a bike that dates from a little bit of time ago or more of a budget bike is the width of the bars and the length of the stem. Again, they're going to contribute to your position on the bike. Old school, narrower bars, longer stem is going to pitch you slightly more on top of and in front of the centre line of the bike. In more modern bikes, even at a more entry-level bar price range, we're going to have a shorter stem and a wider bar, which will actually sit us back into the bike a little bit more and keep us in what we call the pocket, which we're going to look at out on the trail. So let's make a couple of little adjustments and see how that affects things.
So, a couple of minutes with a set of Allen keys, we've loosened off the controls and we've now set them so that we can reach them nice and easy. We've just brought the brake levers up a few degrees so we can now drop the wrist into the bar, and it's one of those changes, as we said earlier, that when you make it, you're kind of thinking, is this really going to make a lot of difference? And true, outside the workshop it doesn't, but when you get onto the trail you'll really begin to notice that you're now pushing into the bar rather than sitting up on top of it. And as we get into the position on the trail, we'll really start to see the difference that can make.
Okay, so the next adjustment we can make in terms of free adjustment is obviously the saddle height and getting that optimum for what we're doing and what we're riding. As many of you will be aware, the rougher the terrain, the more gnarly the section you're riding, the lower you're going to want your saddle. This allows the bike to move more freely around you and less likely to push you about and push you out of the pocket up and over the front of the bike as the back wheel lifts up and over things. The big factor there, the limiting factor, is often the saddle. Obviously with the saddle WAS right down, it's not going to be very good for pedalling. It's going to be hard work, there's going to be a lot of quad action going on and not much else. Jacked up to roadie height, I'm going to be right on the tip of my toes as I pedal and perilously push towards the front of the pocket. Essentially by dropping into the pocket we can control our position on the bike as it moves around below us. If I drop the saddle slightly from optimum pedaling position, it just opens up the pocket and makes it a bit easier to get into. But there's a compromise. We can either do one of two things. We can stop up and down as the trail changes, making those adjustments and then getting back on, but that's not exactly going to be a very fluid and flowing ride. Or we can set the saddle height at an optimum position when we're not compromising too much on pedal, but we are able to move around the bike. So swinging my leg over the bike, obviously we're looking for as near to the full leg extension as possible without fully extending our leg when we're pedaling. That's going to open up 5 sets of muscles into the pedaling process and make things a lot more efficient. If I swing my leg over the bike, I put my heel on the pedal. With the pedal at the maximum downstroke, I've got a good amount of extension. With the middle of my foot on the pedal, there's a very slight bend in my leg, but I'm still using a reasonably full leg extension when I'm pedaling. The difference here and the adjustment we can make here, if I want to run my saddle a bit lower and still get that full leg extension, is by dropping my heel down as I pedal. So that as I pedal through the pedal process with my heel down, I can run my saddle much lower and get a full leg extension than if I pedal very much in a toe down position where I'm getting nowhere near as much leg extension with the same saddle height. My only options if I pedal very toe down to get a good decent leg extension is to raise the saddle up higher, and as I do so I'm restricting my movement around the bike. So maybe take a couple of centimetres out your saddle height, but work on dropping your heel as you pedal across the top and therefore getting that full leg extension. When we stand back up on our pedals, we'll have greater clearance and more of an open pocket to drop into.
So we've looked at the three upgrades, and so far we've looked at lever position and saddle height. Saddle height's one everyone thinks about, but lever position not so much. But one a lot of people miss is your tyres and tyre pressures. Here, obviously changing tyres is going to have a cost, but what doesn't cost anything is setting the air pressure right in the first instance. And what you're looking at is getting the air pressure again to find that balance. You don't want it too hard, the bike ends up losing traction, sliding around, but you get good drive on the grippy sections. You don't want it too soft because you're going to be banging into things, running the risk of an impact puncture. What you really want your tyre to be is to feel a little bit more like an orange than an apple. So when you compress the tyre, it doesn't push right down through to the rim, but you're not getting a very little impression when you push it. You'll get a feel for that as you do more, and the way to test it is to ride, give it a go, and then go again. The thing to remember there is that 3 psi can feel like 30. So if you let a lot of pressure out, the tyre's going to feel really soft and it's going to be rolling around everywhere. So just make small changes, get that setting right, find the balance, and then you can go from there.
Don't forget the only contributing factor to an impact puncture or a pinch flat isn't the tyre pressure as much as what you're doing with your body mass. If your body mass is being slammed around into the front of the bike as it engages with rocks and roots, obviously you're going to put more pressure through that tyre. So we can adjust the tyre pressure to a really good optimum rate for grip without risking pinch flats if we ride a bit softer. And again, riding from the pocket, opening up the levers of the wrist and heel, which we'll look at on the trail, is all going to affect that. But for now, let's do the free bit. The air's free, still, government don't tax that yet. So let's put a little bit in here, just bring that tyre pressure up. It's just a fraction soft at the moment, and just check we've got the same going on the back. So having set the tyre pressure to a happy medium, whereby we're not going to be bouncing around and skidding all over the place, but we're not going to be wallowing or pinch flatting, we've got ourselves our first element of kind of a mechanical input into the suspension. The limited range of the forks is the second element of that mechanical input. But the biggest input on a bike like this, really in terms of dealing with inputs to the bike, and driving energy through the bike is going to be ourselves. And again, we'll look at that out on the trail. But now let's carry on with some slightly less free upgrades. Those that could cost you a small amount of money, but nothing that's going to break the bank. First one of those we're looking at is the grips. An element where manufacturers might look to save some money on the manufacturing costs and keep to a price point are things like your grips. So just changing the grips that come with the bike into a pair of lock-ons that have got a little bit of grip, a little bit of movement in them, not too firm, not too soft, and the right sort of size for my hand is going to make a big difference to that contact point. If I feel that they're slipping around the bars, or there's no grip for my hand on them, then I'm going to lead me to grip on very tight as I ride. As the bike starts to move around below me, I'll be tempted to grip on tight. That death grip on the bars turns into tension in my arms and sends a lot of energy up through my body and bounces me around a lot. I don't want to strangle my bike. It doesn't like it. It's going to try and throw me off. Having a good grip will give you good confidence just to grip a bit less strongly, and therefore not feel that you're going to slip off if you don't.
The next one we can look at is, after putting the air into the tyres, we can look at the tyre choice. And what we're looking at there is, again, thinking about where we're going to ride, the time of year, the conditions that we're going to find out on the trail. Now obviously if you're new to it, you're not going to have too much of an idea. And so the tyres that come on the bike might be good for everything, but great at nothing. Changing the tyres up just gives us that little bit more grip. And being the first contact point with the ground, it gives us that little bit more confidence too. Obviously the other thing we tend to do when we change our tyres is check our tyre pressure. So if they've been running a little bit hard or a little bit soft, we can then have a look at that and get that tuned in. Looking at the tyre choice, if it's winter, you want something with a little bit more of an aggressive grip to it, something that's going to find the grip out on the trail. If it's summer, a little bit lighter tread, just rolls a little bit faster, lets you have a little bit more fun out on the trail when the trails are dry and there's plenty of grip to be found.
Obviously the next point of contact, and probably the most important point of contact with your bike, is your pedals. Again, on even a fairly expensive bike, don't actually even come with pedals these days, because they expect the rider to choose the pedal choice that they want, whether they be clipless or whether they be flats. A more medium level to low end bike is going to come with a fairly cheap plastic pedal. It will get you from the shop to your car or your shop to the trailhead, but is it suited to the riding you're doing? If you're constantly living in the fear of your feet slipping off the pedals, you're also going to tighten up on the bike. There might be a high chance that you are going to slip off the pedals, and that apprehension might be well placed, but simply by tightening up on the bike you're more likely to bounce around. So having a really good contact point with your bike in terms of the pedals is going to make things a lot easier. Match that with a nice flat soled shoe with plenty of give in it that the pins can sit into, and we're going to get a really good bond. But again, there are choices in terms of the way we set our feet up on the pedals that are going to keep us on those pedals regardless of the amount of grip that they afford us. We're going to switch out these old coffee pedals really with very small moulded pins and get ourselves a slightly more upgraded version of a pedal with a more aggressive pin, much more suited to the riding that we're going to do, that's really going to give us more confidence in what we're doing. So we'll spin those out and then we're pretty close to heading out to that trail. So we've made the free upgrades we can in terms of setup. We've made a couple of little changes in terms of tyre, pedal and grip onto a fairly entry-level bike to give us a lot more confidence in our contact with both the ground, the bars and the pedals. Ian and I have flipped the double-headed coin. Ian called Tails, so he'll be riding the budget steed today, and we'll just be looking at the comparison between that and a machine that's slightly more modern and expensive and got more bells and whistles, and just look at how, as the rider, we can overcome the low tech of that bike and ride it just as well and just as confidently over the same terrain as a bike of a higher spec.